In 1946, Washoe County's courthouse in Reno, Nevada granted more than 19,000 divorces in a single year, in a town of under 20,000 people. Nowhere else in the country processed the end of marriages at that scale. Nowhere else built 4-story hotels, guest ranches, and casino floors around a 6-week residency requirement. Nowhere else turned a legislature's ink, dated March 19, 1931, into a tourism industry. Today, the same city manufactures batteries in a $5 billion factory and calls a stretch of its downtown Startup Row. The courthouse, that once granted by some estimates 1 in 20 of the nation's divorces, now hears ordinary civil cases. Its copper dome is unchanged. This is the story of the 60 years Reno, Nevada spent as the place American marriages went to end, built by statute, sustained by glamour, and erased in less time than it takes to read a legal filing. Chapter 1. The River Crossing. The Truckee River begins at Lake Tahoe and dies in the Nevada desert, 120 miles of cold, fast snowmelt, falling out of the Sierra Nevada in search of somewhere flat to stop. In 1859, it found a place where the current widened just enough for a raft, a stretch of bank where wagons bound east out of California could cross without losing a team to the water. A man named Charles William Fuller noticed the same thing the river noticed. He built a log ferry there that year, added a bridge soon after, and by 1860 had put up a small hotel for travelers who reached the crossing too late in the day to keep moving. It was not a settlement, it was a toll and a roof, repeated daily. Then, in 1861, Fuller sold it. The buyer was a man named Myron C. Lake, and what he bought was not much: a rope ferry, a wooden bridge, 1 hotel. What he saw in it was a monopoly. Lake rebuilt the bridge wider and sturdier than Fuller's, wide enough for freight wagons, and set a toll gate at its western end that became, for miles in either direction, the only way across the Truckee. Stand at that bridge in the years after. Every wagon moving east out of California crosses at Lake's price, or it does not cross. The buildings that gathered around the toll took his name informally, long before any government made it official. Lake's Crossing, a place countable in structures rather than residents. It was not a town, not yet, not in any sense the word would carry 20 years later. It was a bridge with a name attached. Lake understood something before there was a railroad to prove him right. A crossing without a reason to stop is just a bridge. So when the Central Pacific Railroad pushed its survey stakes east across the Nevada desert, Lake made sure his crossing gave the railroad a reason. He deeded them the land they needed, on one condition: that the company build a depot on it. It was a wager on a railroad that had not yet arrived. The wager took 7 years to settle. On May 9, 1868, the Central Pacific reached Lake's Crossing, and it did not arrive quietly. Track gangs, surveyors, and railroad land agents converged within days of each other, and the company staged a single-day auction of town lots before the tents pitched around the crossing had time to become anything more permanent than canvas. By evening, the lots were sold, and the tent camp had a plat map where that morning there had been none. Central Pacific's president, Leland Stanford, gave the new town a name pulled from the Union Army's dead: Jesse Lee Reno, a brigadier general killed 6 years earlier at the Battle of South Mountain. Reno, Nevada existed as a matter of legal record before it existed as a place anyone had reason to visit. What the town inherited from its founding was a peculiar geography. It sat on the one railroad connecting the Pacific coast to everywhere east of it, on the line between Sacramento and Salt Lake City, which meant a traveler could leave New York and stand on the streets of Reno within days. And yet the same town sat inside a ring of desert and mountain, the Sierra Nevada to the west, sagebrush flats in every other direction, that made it feel, to anyone who arrived, far more remote than any timetable suggested. Fast to get to, hard to be found in. Nobody at that auction in 1868 was thinking about marriage law. Nobody deeding land to a railroad was thinking about residency requirements, measured in weeks, that did not exist yet anywhere in the country. Nobody building a depot at a railroad president's request was building a courthouse. What they had made, without knowing it, was a place offering exactly two things to anyone who came looking: distance and a fast way to reach it. Someone would need both eventually. The reason had nothing to do with railroads. Boy. Chapter 2. The First Divorce Colony. Reno was not the first town to sell distance to the unhappily married. Sioux Falls got there a decade earlier, out on the flat plains of the Dakota Territory, and it got there almost by accident. South Dakota's law required 90 days of residency, 3 months, no inquiry into fault, no public hearing on what a husband or wife had done to earn the separation. And by the early 1890s, the town had built a seasonal economy around waiting those 90 days out. Hotels went up with a single purpose: house the wealthy and the merely respectable while the clock ran, with parlors built for correspondence, dining rooms built for guests who did not wish to be seen dining, staff trained never to ask why a woman traveling alone had checked in for a season instead of a night. Newspapers back east had a name for it before South Dakota's own legislature did. They called it a divorce colony. It did not survive its own success. By 1908, South Dakota's voters had closed the loophole for good, stretching the residency requirement until the arithmetic no longer worked, and the hotels built to hold a season's worth of petitioners emptied out with nowhere left to send their guests. The business did not recover. 2 years before that ending, in 1906, someone had already found the next place. A society lawyer working the courthouses of New York, his name lost to the record, his clients not, had spent the Sioux Falls years studying what made a divorce colony function and what eventually killed one. He needed a residency law measured in months, not years. He needed a rail line fast enough that a 6-month absence looked, on the calendar, like nothing more than a long trip west. He needed a town too small and too far from anywhere his clients' names meant something. Reno, still governed by a 6-month residency statute nobody in Nevada had written with this purpose in mind, fit every requirement he had. In 1906, he began quietly sending clients there. Not gossip. An actual referral network, billed by the hour. The town noticed the business before it noticed the reason. Harry Goss noticed first. Goss was a builder, not a judge, not a lawyer, a man who put up walls once demand had been correctly read, and little of his life before 1906 survives in any record beyond the trade he already worked. That year he broke ground on the riverside, a 4-story chateau-style hotel of stone and timber rising on the bank of the Truckee, built at a scale the depot town's ordinary traffic had never required. The visitors had not arrived yet. He built ahead of them anyway. A year before Goss's hotel went up, in 1905, the city had already built the bridge that would give the riverside its view. The Virginia street span crossed the Truckee 1 block away, iron and stone, built for wagon traffic and nothing more particular than that. It became something else quickly enough. A woman leaving the courthouse with a decree in hand could walk the 1 block to the bridge's center rail and drop a wedding ring into the water below. One motion, no ceremony. The gold already sinking into the current before she turned back toward the hotel. Sioux Falls had proven the model, then closed itself down inside a generation. Reno had what Sioux Falls no longer did: a 6-month law nobody was defending, a Riverview hotel built exactly on schedule, and a lawyer in New York with more clients than Harry Goss's 4 stories could yet hold. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Reno, Nevada, New York, the Truckee River, still carrying whatever the current had already taken. 4 points on a map no legislature in either state had drawn with this trade in mind. Nobody filing paperwork at the county courthouse in 1906 used the word colony. Within the decade, somebody would need a bigger word than that. Chapter 3. The Pickford Scandal. By 1918, the 6-month law is no longer a rumor lawyers pass between offices in New York. It is procedure, tested for over a decade, sitting quietly under Nevada statute while the Riverside fills its rooms one contested marriage at a time. Into that procedure steps Patrick McCarran, a young Reno attorney with a general practice, a Washoe County bar card, and no reputation yet worth defending. McCarran takes the case that will put his name in newspapers 3,000 miles from his office. Mary Pickford, a star of the silent screen, wants out of her marriage to the actor Owen Moore so that she can marry Douglas Fairbanks, himself already a familiar face in the same studios. The clock starts the day she arrives. Pickford's residency in Nevada lasts barely more than 2 weeks. That alone is not unusual. The law asks for 6 months of residency, not 6 months of scrutiny, and judges across the state have grown accustomed to counting arrivals rather than investigating them. What draws real attention is who finishes the case, and it is not the woman whose name is on every marquee in the country. Owen Moore quietly walks into a Douglas County courtroom and obtains the actual decree himself, on the claim that his wife had relocated to Nevada for her health, a health nobody at the studio had ever mentioned needing tending. The distinction is not accidental. A decree granted to a runaway wife reads one way in a newspaper. A decree granted on paper to a concerned husband acting for her reads another. Not Pickford, her husband. The governor of Nevada calls it, on the record, a joke on the state's judiciary. The attorney general goes further, asking the state Supreme Court to declare Mary Pickford, freshly remarried, freshly famous for it, a bigamist under Nevada law. The charge is not rhetorical. If Nevada's own courts will not stand behind Moore's decree, the marriage performed afterward exists nowhere under the law of any state Pickford might next call home. The court declines to rule on the merits. It throws the case out for lack of standing, which settles nothing, satisfies no one, and leaves the divorce trade exactly where it had been before the filing. Legal, embarrassing, and open for business. Nothing here is resolved. It stays open for 4 more years. Then, in 1922, Nevada's voters do what the state Supreme Court would not. They pass a constitutional amendment closing the exact seam McCarran had used, the health claim, the 2-week residency dressed as relocation, the husband finishing what the wife started. Not a repeal. A patch fitted precisely to the shape of one embarrassing case. Reno does not need the loophole to keep operating. It only ever needed the 6 months, and the 6 months survives the vote untouched. The trade survives the scandal. The scandal simply stops being repeatable. Then, in February of that same year, the Riverside Hotel burns to the ground. 16 years earlier, it had gone up purpose-built for this exact business, timed to a legislative calendar, financed on the bet that Reno's 6-month residents would need somewhere respectable to wait out a decree. Harry Goss's hotel had outlasted Sioux Falls's collapse, the Pickford headlines, the Attorney General, and the amendment that finally closed McCarran's loophole. None of that survives the fire. Not a wing spared, not a facade left standing for a future renovation to build around. 16 years of ledgers, registries, and Riverview rooms booked a season in advance, gone in the space of one night, down to a foundation and ash. Fire does what scandal and legislation could not. Reno, in February 1922, has a fire department, a river running the same course it always has, and hundreds of residency seekers with nowhere left to sit out their 6 months in the style the town had built its name on. It also has, within walking distance of the ash, men who have spent 16 years reading the Riverside's ledgers and know precisely what that address is worth with or without a building standing on it. Somewhere between the courthouse and the riverbank, a decision is already forming, made by someone whose name does not yet appear in any account of the fire. One of them has already picked up a telephone. Chapter 4. Wingfield's gamble. The telephone call terminates at George Wingfield's desk, and by the time he sets the receiver down, the question is no longer whether to rebuild the Riverside, but what shape its replacement will take. Wingfield owns the banks that hold Reno's paper, the political machine that decides who sits on the bench, and now in the ash on the riverbank, an opportunity no insurance adjuster would recognize as won. He does not order a replica. He orders something larger, aimed less at the town's own residents than at the women arriving from New York and Chicago with 6 months to spend and no intention of spending them modestly. The old Riverside sheltered whoever could pay the rate. The new one will be built to be photographed. For the design, Wingfield turns to Frederick de Longchamps, the architect who gave Washoe County its courthouse in 1910, copper dome and all. The same building where the decrees themselves get signed. It is in one sense a simple rebuild contract, a fee, a set of blueprints, 6 stories where 1 story burned. In another sense, it closes a circuit running the length of the divorce trade's entire machinery. De Longchamps already designed the room where a marriage ends. Now he designs the room where the waiting happens between filing and decree. The same hand draws the courthouse and the hotel. Reno does not build these things separately. The new Riverside opens on May 14, 1927. 6 stories of stone and brick standing exactly where the old wooden hotel burned. And the guests checking in are not the itinerant claim jumpers and cattle buyers who once filled Myron Lake's crossing. Gloria Vanderbilt comes. Claire Booth comes. They come to sit out a residency requirement in a building built for people with no intention of suffering through it. This is not a hotel, an actual machine for converting 6 idle months into revenue, and Wingfield has built the finest one the divorce trade has ever seen. The lobby fills. The ledgers Wingfield's men once poured over start filling with different names. The 3-month law follows the hotel by months, not years, and the timing is not incidental. Other states have started cutting their own residency requirements, chasing the same trade in unhappy marriages that just paid for the Riverside's rebuilding. A 6-month wait was tolerable when Reno held something close to a monopoly on discretion. It becomes a liability the moment a competitor offers the same discretion faster. So the legislature acts. 6 months becomes 3, and the state that invented the quickie divorce moves to keep the title before someone else claims it. Wingfield's hotel did not need to compete for guests it did not yet have. It needed the ones already checked in to still be there in 90 days. The market Reno built gets defended the way markets get defended, legislatively. On June 25, 1929, the arch-spanning Virginia Street, erected 3 years earlier for a highway exposition already fading from memory, receives the words it will carry for the rest of the century. A contest, a $100 prize, and a slogan settled on Reno, the biggest little city in the world. It is boosterism, plain and unashamed, chosen by committee for cash, and stamped in lights over a street that leads directly to Wingfield's Hotel and de Longchamps Courthouse. The town has spent 7 years converting a fire into an industry. It says so now in neon. None of it, the arch, the hotel, the shortened calendar, touches what a stock exchange half a continent away is about to do to the money that keeps checking into the Riverside. Wingfield's banks hold paper on ranches across half the state, on mines running thinner every year, on hotels newer than the one he just finished building. The biggest little city in the world has 4 months left before it learns what that phrase costs. Chapter 5. The 6-week law. The 4 months run out. Wall Street breaks in October 1929, and the credit propping up ranches, mines, and hotels across half of Nevada does not survive contact with it. No single collapse announces itself in Reno. No run on a bank, no headline naming a date. The city instead thins out. Fewer guests, fewer freight cars, a local economy losing altitude rather than going off a cliff. Mines that fed half the state's payroll cut shifts before they cut men, then cut men. Wingfield's banks, the largest in the state, carry losses no published ledger fully discloses. The biggest little city in the world does not fall. It idles. South of it, a different economy is assembling itself around a canyon on the Colorado River. By 1931, federal contractors are already grading roads and pouring the first concrete toward what will become Hoover Dam. And Las Vegas starts filling with men who have jobs. Reno's ledgers run one direction, Las Vegas's run the other. One city is watching its mines close. The other is watching a workforce arrive by the trainload. Nevada, a single state governing both regions, now contains two economies moving in opposite directions under one legislature. One stalling, one under construction. That legislature convenes in Carson City in the winter of 1931, with a state government that cannot wait for a half-built dam to start paying dividends. The tools available to a rural state with almost nothing left to tax are limited to whatever vice its neighbors have not yet legalized first. Two bills arrive addressing exactly that shortfall, filed weeks apart in different chambers, headed nonetheless for the same governor's desk. Assemblyman Phil Tobin, a freshman legislator, introduces Assembly Bill 98, which would legalize wide-open commercial gambling for the first time since the state banned it in 1909. State Senator Harry Heitman introduces a companion measure cutting Nevada's divorce residency requirement to 6 weeks. The shortest in the country, both bills clear the legislature within weeks of each other. On March 19, 1931, in the depths of the Depression, Governor Fred Balzar signs them on the same afternoon. Nevada exits that day having legalized two industries built entirely on what other states refused to permit, one on the wager, one on the decree. The governor's pen does not pause between them. No separate ceremony marks one signature over the other. No order of priority recorded for either bill. Just two laws, one afternoon. The gambling law reopens tables that had operated in back rooms for 2 decades. The divorce law does something else entirely. It manufactures a population. 6 weeks to end a marriage, 6 weeks of paperwork, 6 weeks that a rural county now intends to fill with paying guests. A spouse from anywhere in the country can establish a Nevada address, wait out the requirement, and leave with a decree no other state can issue faster. What the statute does not supply is somewhere to spend those 6 weeks, and ranchers across the region, already living inside the stagnation the North cannot shake, start supplying it. Within a few years, the guest ranch built to house 6-week residents is a fixture of the northern Nevada map. Guests take their meals family style, 10 to 20 to a table, in dining rooms built for households that do not exist there, waiting out a clock the legislature set for them. Days repeat themselves on purpose. Breakfast at a fixed hour, an afternoon accounted for by nothing. Dinner in rooms raised originally for cattle operations, not for tenants marking weeks off a calendar. The ranch is spread outward from Reno, north toward Pyramid Lake, west through Washoe Valley, further west to Verde, up into the Tahoe Basin, until the tally of them reaches as many as 36. 36 ranches, 36 dining rooms. Somebody has to run them. Chapter 6. The Ranches and the Numbers. Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr. answers the question of who runs a ranch built to hold 6-week residents, and he answers it the way a Vanderbilt answers most questions, with money spent for effect. He served his own Reno residency in 1927, one of the anonymous many who arrived quietly, waited out the weeks, and left with a decree. And a few years later, he returns to Washoe County, not as a petitioner, but as a landlord, buying 2 of the ranches outright. The TH Ranch and the Lazy M.E. are his to bankroll, both a short drive from town, both indistinguishable at a glance from any working cattle spread. Running the Lazy M.E. day to day, listed on its own paperwork as owner, is a woman named Emily Pence Wood. And Wood understands something her competitors do not. A dude ranch does not fill its dining rooms with better beds or better food. It fills them with a photograph. She gets the photograph. Clark Gable spends a residency at the Lazy M.E., And the picture of him there. Sleeves rolled, a horse nearby, nothing in the frame admitting to a courthouse 40 minutes off, runs in movie magazines and society pages with national circulation. Other names follow, some of them clients themselves, some of them guests of clients, all of them useful to a ranch that needs to be photographed as often as it is fed. Vanderbilt's method is blunter. Freeboard for anyone whose name moves copies off a newsstand. It costs him nothing he cannot recoup in column inches, and it turns a mandatory residency into something that photographs like a vacation. Reno's divorce trade acquires a gloss it never had under Myron Lake or Harry Goss. It did not need the gloss. It takes it anyway. Picture Virginia Street on a Saturday night in 1946. Harold's Club runs neon the length of a block. Harrah's does the same 2 doors down. The Riverside Hotel throws its own light onto the bridge, onto Cadillacs and Fords parked 3 deep at the curb, and onto the Southern Pacific's overland train easing into the depot 2 blocks west. 6 blocks south, inside the Washoe County Courthouse, case files sit stacked by the 100 behind a locked door, each one counting down a clock the legislature fixed at 6 weeks. Above the street, light, noise. A party running on borrowed time from the tables. Below it, filed and dated. The paperwork that makes the party legal. The paperwork, totaled, does not resemble a party. Between 1929 and 1939, the Washoe County Courthouse alone grants more than 32,000 divorces in a town whose population does not rise above 20,000 for most of the decade and sits closer to 18. In 1931 alone, Northern Nevada's courts process upward of 4,800 of them. Some estimates place Nevada's share of the country's entire divorce total at around 5% during these peak years. One state, under 100,000 residents, accounting for 1 in 20 divorces granted anywhere in the United States. Filing fees alone are reported to make up as much as 15% of Nevada's state government revenue across these years. A courthouse does not run on sentiment. It runs on ledgers, and by the late 1930s, the ledger in Washoe County has become one of the state's most dependable exports. Around it, a second industry roots itself without asking permission from the first. On February 23, 1935, Harold Smith Sr. opens Harold's Club on Virginia Street with $500, borrowed from his father. No card games at first, only slot machines and nerve, built on nothing more than foot traffic and the 6 idle weeks the divorce trade keeps supplying. In October 1937, Bill Harrah opens a bingo parlor a few doors down. It fails within 2 months, closes, and reopens that winter under his own name, the first brick in what becomes an empire. Neither man is in the divorce business. Both men are counting on the same restless money. By 1946, the tally the courthouse keeps reaches its peak. More than 19,000 divorces granted across Nevada in a single year, against a state that logged roughly 1,000 a year through most of the 1920s. 19,000 decrees. 19,000 individual 6-week waits, each one attached to a name, a marriage, a reason the record does not always bother to state, filed in a courthouse 6 blocks from a street that never once asks why. Somewhere in that count, in the years just ahead, is a playwright's decree and the marriage it clears the way for. And the newspapers are about to give the whole arrangement a name. Chapter 7, Hollywood's Waiting Room. Walter Winchell gives it a name first. The newspaper columnist needs shorthand for what Nevada's courts are producing at industrial volume, and by the mid-1940s, he has one. Renovated. A man walks in married. 6 weeks later, he walks out something else, and Winchell's readers know exactly what to call him. Other columnists borrow the word without crediting him, radio repeats it, and inside a few years it needs no footnote at all. Say it in a diner in Ohio, and everyone nods. The word spreads coast to coast, attaching itself to anyone newly single after a Nevada decree, and it will outlive the column that coined it. Winchell did not invent the divorce. He invented what to call it. Somewhere past the city limits, the Flying M.E. Ranch becomes the physical address the word conjures. Through the 1940s and into the 1950s, it is the ranch most requested by name. Not the TH, not the lazy ME, a third property entirely, with its own brand, its own horses, its own guest ledger filling with names the local papers know better than to print. Getting the cure is what locals call the wait itself, 6 weeks of dude ranch idleness standing in for a prescription nobody needed. Guests ride in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and watch the calendar the rest of the time. The same 6 weeks that fills a dock at downtown, filling a saddle out here instead. Guests arrive married and leave otherwise. The joke is that nobody here is sick. The arrangement works anyway. By 1956, the ranch of consequence is a different one again. Pyramid Lake Ranch, chosen this year by a man the gossip columns have been circling for months. Arthur Miller arrives already a known quantity, a playwright with an established literary reputation, the kind of name a theater critic recognizes without needing the marquee. New York knows him. Broadway knows him. The Nevada desert, for the moment, does not care either way, and that indifference is exactly what the residency requires. He has come to end a marriage, his first, the details of which the record keeps to itself. 6 weeks is the sentence Nevada hands down to everyone equally, famous or not. Miller serves his in full. He does not spend the 6 weeks idle. At Pyramid Lake Ranch, waiting on paperwork, the way everyone else in the county is waiting on paperwork, Miller writes, "A short story takes shape. Not yet a screenplay. Not yet a title anyone outside the ranch has heard. Something about wild horses and the men who still chase them for a living, men running out of both horses and living to make from it. He drafts it longhand in a rented room. In the same 6 weeks his old marriage is being formally dissolved. The two processes running side by side without once touching. The wedding chapel is 6 blocks away. He has no reason yet to enter it. The decree comes through." Days later, on June 29, 1956, Miller marries Marilyn Monroe, a film star whose name turns his residency from a quiet matter of paperwork into a wire service photograph overnight. Photographers who never once bothered with a Reno courthouse for an ordinary decree find a reason to show up for this one. The playwright and the actress, married within days of a Nevada courtroom, neither of their public images has anything to do with. Every paper that ever ran Winchell's word runs this marriage too, renovated, same as anyone else. What Miller wrote at Pyramid Lake Ranch does not stay a short story for long. On the page already, it is becoming something else. A screenplay, a production, a cast not yet assembled. 5 years stand between this draft and a movie screen. What happens when it gets there is still ahead. RE Chapter 8, The Quiet Pivot. The Misfits opens in movie houses in 1961, 5 years after Miller sets down that first draft at Pyramid Lake Ranch. Marilyn Monroe plays Rosalind Tabor, a woman only hours clear of a Reno decree, restless in a town built to cure restlessness with paperwork and 6-week leases. In one scene, she stands within sight of the Virginia street span, the same bridge, the same rail, the same river running beneath it that had carried away rings for 3 decades already. She turns hers on her finger the way a woman turns a ring when she has already thought about where it might go. Divorcees had been dropping wedding bands off that rail into the Truckee since the 1920s. One motion, gold gone before anyone turned back toward the hotel. Rosalind's hand closes around hers instead. She keeps it. The film borrows the ritual. This time no one finishes it. 2 years later, in 1963, the Flying M.E. ranch house burns to the ground. No cause worth recording survives, and no crowd gathers to watch it go. It had sold the same product as every other ranch scattered along the Truckee and out past Pyramid Highway. Solitude, a horse to ride, and a legal address for 6 weeks, nothing more. It is one of the first of the old divorce ranches to disappear completely. Not converted, not resold, not folded into a motel chain. Guests had ridden its horses and served their 6 weeks in its low pine rooms for the better part of 3 decades. By the end of 1963, none of that remains. Nothing to visit, nothing to sell. The industry Nevada built runs on a technicality, and a technicality drafted in one legislative session can be undone in another, in a different capital, by different men who never have to explain themselves to Reno. The 6-week residency law passes through Carson City in a single sitting in 1931. Tourists and lawyers already lining up before the ink dries. Sacramento takes rather longer. In 1969, California signs the nation's first modern no-fault divorce law, the Family Law Act, striking the old requirement to prove cruelty or desertion or adultery, and replacing all of it with a single clean phrase, irreconcilable differences. No residency requirement to travel for, no grounds to invent. It takes effect January 1st, 1970. Other legislatures follow within a few years, each one lifting the same requirement Nevada had spent 4 decades selling as scarce. The migratory divorce trade that had defined Reno for 6 decades does not end with a hearing or a headline. It simply empties out. The phrase that had marketed the city for 2 generations, 6 weeks and you are free, stops meaning anything anyone still needs to travel for. Lawyers who once billed by the 6-week case find fewer clients arriving by train, then fewer arriving by car, then almost none. Judges sit through calendars with fewer names on them each month. No single week marks the end of it. Reno simply stops filling up. 2 years earlier, in 1967, the Nevada Gaming Commission revokes the Riverside Hotel's gaming license after a dice-cheating scandal on its own casino floor. No state house to blame this time, no rival capital. A rigged table and men who got caught. The hotel that once hosted Gloria Vanderbilt and 3 decades of Reno's paperwork trade before her had stood at the center of the same 6 blocks as the courthouse and the bridge, close enough to walk between a decree and a blackjack table in the time it took to light a cigarette. It closes completely in 1968, 1 year before California's law even takes effect. By the end of the decade, gaming and migratory divorce, the 2 trades that had kept Reno's downtown lit for a generation, have each taken a separate, unrelated hit within 3 years of each other. The courthouse calendar, once double and triple booked, with 6-week residents waiting their turn before a judge, six-paro mirschasmoy, sits with rows of empty continuances. Clerks who once processed dozens of decrees a week now process a handful. The ranches stand with no one counting the days. The riverside stands dark. The bridge still crosses the same river. What remains by 1970 is not a business anymore. It is a set of buildings, still standing. Chapter 9. What the River Keeps. The ranches go first and quietly. Through the 1970s, the properties that once advertised themselves as the TH, the Lazy Emmy, the Flying Emmy, and the Pyramid Lake Ranch, 36 of them at the trade's height, pass out of the divorce business one by one, with no auctioneer's gavel and no notice in the paper. Some are sold off for cattle grazing. Some are subdivided into residential parcels, their guest cabins renamed, their corrals filled with horses belonging to no 6-week resident. A few are torn down outright, replaced by developments with names that make no reference to what stood there before. A handful continue on as ordinary guest ranches, marketed now for the high desert air rather than for a judge's docket. None operate as divorce ranches today. The ledgers that once tracked a stranger's exact date of arrival are gone. The Riverside Hotel sits empty for years after its license is revoked in 1967 and its doors close the following year. Pigeons take the upper floors. Windows break and stay broken. By 1997, the building, designed like the courthouse 3 blocks away by Frederick de Longchamps, faces a demolition order, one vote on an agenda away from becoming a parking lot. It survives that vote. Developers hollow out the structure and convert it into artist lofts and apartments, restoring the terracotta facade Wingfield commissioned in 1927 to advertise a fortune built on silver and on strangers' marriages ending. The building is added to the National Register of Historic Places. People sleep now where the 6-week residents once did, paying rent instead of a judge's fee. Reno's economy does not collapse with the divorce trade. It converts. Casinos, already downtown since the 1930s, absorb the tourist traffic the ranches leave behind, and for 2 decades gaming alone carries the city's name. The arch over Virginia Street still reads the biggest little city in the world, a slogan gambling built and gambling paid for. Then, decades later, the conversion happens again. Tesla builds a $5 billion gigafactory in the scrubland east of downtown, and Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Walmart open distribution and data facilities in the industrial parks, spreading along the interstate. Investors start calling a stretch of the old downtown Startup Row. The same streets that once processed rushed weddings and rushed divorces now process venture capital. De Longchamps' first major commission still stands 3 blocks away at 117 South Virginia Street, the Washoe County Courthouse, designed in the same years as the Riverside. Its 1910 copper dome has weathered green but is otherwise unchanged. The stained glass above the stairway is intact. The docket does not care what it hears. Today, the courthouse processes ordinary civil cases, contract disputes, probate, small claims, instead of the thousands of out-of-state divorces it once granted in a single year. A dome does not know what it presides over. It has only ever kept its shape. The Virginia Street Bridge that carried 3 generations of departing wives across the Truckee is demolished in 2016 and replaced with a new span, built to the same width over the same crossing. The replacement is driven by decades of structural wear on a span dating to 1905, not by any sentiment about what had happened on it. For decades before that, women leaving the courthouse with a decree in hand had stopped at its rail and dropped their wedding rings into the water below, a ritual that predates any film account of it and outlasted the industry that gave it meaning. Divers have still occasionally found actual wedding rings resting in the riverbed silt over the years, gold worn thin, resized twice, each one discarded by someone trying to make an ending as literal as the law had once made it easy. Pale concrete spans the same bend in the river now, the new bridge standing where the old one stood. In early evening, the Truckee runs the color of weak tea, thick with a century of silt, and under the traffic the only sound is water moving over rock. Somewhere below the current, past anything a dredge has reached, the riverbed holds whatever the water has not yet carried on toward Pyramid Lake. The bridge was rebuilt to move commuters across a river. The river was never built for anything, and it is the one still holding what people meant to leave behind. The water keeps moving.